Someone has asked, what about violent revolution on behalf of the poor and the oppressed? If there is a just war theory, surely there has to be a just revolution theory.
I think in examining the question of just war theory and just revolution theory, that it bypasses the whole problem to say, why can't there be a just revolution if there's a just war? The issue in Christianity is there a just war? First of all, what has to be dealt with, very frankly, is the just war theory makes no appearance in Christianity till approximately 300 years after Jesus. In fact, closer to 400 years after Jesus. We are confronted here with a reality that for 300 years, Christians had no theory by which they could participate in war, no theory justifying their participation in war. It's not until St. Ambrose and then his student St. Augustine, at the end of the 4th century, put these things into place that Christians have, even theoretically, a just war theory. Now, we have to be honest about it. St. Augustine never said that there could be a just war. All he said was that if Christians were allowed to participate in war, these were the standards that would have to be met. The fact of history is this: no Catholic, no Protestant, no Orthodox hierarchy has ever declared the war of its own nation unjust while that war was continuing. All wars have not only been declared dead just by Christians, they have been declared doubly just. The fact and the reality of history is this: no nation today or yesterday, and no nation imaginable in the future, would sit down or has sat down and prepared its military strategy on the basis of the standard, whether it conforms to the Christian just war theory or not. Therefore, what we have in existence in the just war theory is a purely theoretical, speculative kind of approach to the problem of war that, in fact, has never been employed by the Christian churches to judge the war of their own nations in its entire existence. Beyond that, the just war theory is almost universally not taught today or yesterday in the normal religious education programs, catechetical programs of any of the churches, Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant. Any poll of any 100 Christians, or 1,000 Christians, or 10,000 Christians, any place in the world, will come out universally the same. 99+% of them have no idea what the standard of the just war theory is. Yet, in most of the Christian churches, most Christians would call themselves just war Christians. That is, they would say that they could go to war because they are Christians and Christianity has a just war theory. What is taking place here is something that is diabolically deceptive in the extreme. What is taking place here is that Christians are using a theoretical exception to Jesus' teachings of nonviolent love in order to justify century upon century of mass slaughter to the point where Christianity has become the largest single destroyer of people in war in the last 1,700 years, and no one in Christianity, for all practical purposes, knows the standards that they say that they are employing. Augustine put this theory together in order to try to limit Christian participation in war, where the fact of the matter is, a theory that was meant to limit Christian participation in war has become the excuse for Christians to engage in any and all kind of warfare that the particular nation state calls upon them to engage in. This is neither Christian nor is it human. It's hypocrisy. The churches do not teach, Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant, do not dare teach the just war theory, because no war has ever been fought and no war will ever be fought according to its standards. To teach the just war theory is for all practical purposes to wind up in precisely the same place as one would wind up if one simply looked at the gospel, finding that war is impossible. We always have to remember that the just war theory is only theory. It is not dogma. No Christian has to believe it in order to be in full communion with the church. It is a theoretical exception that, if applied properly, and if the circumstances are properly evaluated, it says the Christian may but does not have to participate in war. As I said, no one applies it. Few teach it. And the reason for that is no country builds its military around its standards. So the most honest question has to be asked. If countries do not build their military to adhere to the just war standards, then isn't it the church and the Christian that has to ask the hard questions before ever engaging in mass slaughter, before ever becoming an agent of homicide for a government? Now, if the Christian doesn't ask the questions, as Christians have not been for 1700 years, in this long history of this theory that is never employed but always referred to as the justification, and if the government doesn't plan according to the theory, it is not the truth of the matter. The theory, something diabolical in the church, a mirage of morality, something that continually lures the Christian into activity utterly contrary to the teaching of Jesus, under the auspices that somehow, somewhere, someplace, there is some kind of justification. Isn't the just war theory a way of trying to appropriate divine approval for that which we will not measure against divine standards? It is not dogma. It is only theory. And it has proved itself operationally fallacious theory. Theory, logical theory, unrelated to the realities of life, to the realities of war, and therefore inapplicable. The time has clearly come for Christians, Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant to admit that they have not applied it because they could not apply it. They have not taught it because they are afraid of running directly into problems with governments. If governments are required to conduct their wars according to Christian just war theory, or else Christians can't participate. Time has come for Christian leadership to admit that the just war theory is something that is not only not found in the New Testament, not only something that Jesus never taught, but is something that in fact has proved itself a curse to Christianity. For example, one of the standards of the just war theory is, and always has been and is to this day, civilians cannot be executed in war. Combatants and only combatants are the targets in war, those who choose to go into a homicidal conflict. The civilian is immune. This is universal and this is known. There is no exception. To kill a civilian in war intentionally is an unjust act that makes the war unjust, that makes the killing unjust. In moral theology, unjust killing has one name: murder. And this is clear in Christian just war teaching since Augustine. Yet, in the Second World War, to use but one example, of the 52 million human beings who were slaughtered, 48% of 52 million who were slaughtered were civilians. The American Christian hierarchy missed it. The English Christian hierarchy missed it. The German Christian hierarchy missed it. The Italian Christian hierarchy missed it. The Japanese Christian hierarchy missed it. Everyone missed it. It is precisely this obliviousness to the obvious, this chronic inattentiveness to reality by those who call themselves just war realists, that has allowed the just war theory to become part of the gimmickry, part of the instrumentality that has seduced Christianity into this terrible diabolical snare, participating and justifying the participation of the church in mass slaughter and homicide. The just war theory is illusion. It is also illusion, not just politically, not just theologically, but psychologically. For what human being goes into the military and is nurtured simultaneously with the intense nurturing process that the military operates on, the process of unconditional obedience to orders, what Christian is simultaneously brought in where the military chaplaincy as the alternative with every bit of the same intensity nurtures the Christian boy or girl being trained to kill to apply the just war theory. It's all illusion, it's all sham, and it is all fraud. The just war theory is taught by no Christian chaplaincy to any of the soldiers, boys or girls, being inducted into any of the armies in any part of the world. It's a gimmick to try to justify what Christ saw as unjustifiable. Once again, it's an illusion. Finally, after all the intense training that militaries put people through in killing and in homicide, and after all the effort that goes into getting people to obey orders unconditionally to kill, and with hardly any effort gone into the other side even to explain what the standards of the just war theory are to those who are being asked to kill who are Christian, without any effort being given to give an orderly and reasonable way out for a person that wishes to disobey because he perceives an act as unjustifiable killing and therefore murder and therefore morally impossible. After that whole illusionary structure is seen, there is one final illusion. Does it even seem psychologically possible that someone, after all that negative training as far as the teachings of Jesus, that is not being taught the teachings of Jesus and being taught something positive that's explicitly contrary to the teachings of Jesus, nurtured deeply in it. And then he or she is set against other people who have been nurtured exactly the same way and trained as killers. Does it seem even reasonable that at that point of hot combat, that these people would be applying the just war theory? That they could psychologically do it? This is absurd. The theory is equally a psychological sham. Logically, theologically, psychologically, politically, militarily, the theory simply is an illusion. Everyone agrees to and everyone knows it's an illusion. But all lie one to the other that it is in fact the teachings of Jesus, or at least consistent with the teachings of Jesus. Time has come to explicitly reject it for what it is. Any attempt to take the just war theory and simply move it over into just revolution, meaning violent revolution, bears this entire weight plus more. For in the just war theory, the war has to be instituted by legitimate authority. Who's the legitimate authority to institute a revolution? Who speaks for the poor? If history tells us anything, revolutions are always, in every instance, conducted by a limited few people, intelligent, who then organize the poor to a large extent against their wills. We know in the American Revolution that happened. The vast majority of people wanted no part of revolution. The vast majority of people want no part of political homicide. Revolutions are conducted by a minority with power and intelligence. The fact of the matter is, who says this minority speaks for the people? Absolute requirement of the just war theory. But this is just all so much sham. All so much sham. We can go on talking about the illusion that revolutions don't kill civilians, when in fact they do, and they do it freely, those civilians that disagree with them. I could give you not 100, but 1,000 stories of revolutionary murder of civilians whose only crime was that they did not agree with the policies and the principles of the revolution. Revolution, like war, is the same grisly, cruel, vicious business conducted by people not living in the Spirit of Christ. What we do have to say, however, is that we must make no mistake about it. Oppressed and poor people never initiate violence. Oppressed and poor people are always using violence in a defensive posture. Unless violence had not been used for the last 10, 15, 20 years against them, they wouldn't be oppressed and poor. It is because of the prior violence of the state, the violence of the wealthy, the violence of the middle class, that they are in a position of being oppressed and poor, and therefore the violence that they employ at least has this to say about it: it's defensive. But we equally in all sincerity, have to be honest. Jesus never recommended that kind of step to the poor. Jesus proclaimed the gospel primarily to the poor of his time, people who lived on the margins of destitution. What he proclaimed was the Sermon on the Mount. He put no one under a spiritual disadvantage because they were under an economic disadvantage. The fact of the matter is, the picture of Jesus as a revolutionary with a machine gun is an absurdity, regardless of how many revolutions try to employ it. The fact of the matter is, a number of years ago, in a Latin American country, Peru, I believe it was, a group of violent revolutionaries ran into some very serious difficulty and were trapped and I guess eventually killed. And among them was found a statue. And the statue was a wood carving of a Madonna, the Blessed Mother and the baby Jesus. And the statue made international press headlines because it was the Blessed Mother with the baby Jesus. And the baby Jesus had a hand grenade in his hand. I ask you in all seriousness, is this a valid Christian symbol? Madonna with child with grenade. You know and I know it isn't. But if it is not a valid Christian symbol, then we also have to ask about the military chaplaincy as a valid Christian symbol. Does it point to what Jesus is pointing about? What does it talk about what Jesus is talking about? Does it teach what Jesus taught? Or, like the Madonna with child with grenade, instead of it, the symbol being a Christian symbol, it's like a magnet that draws people into the life of God. Does it, in fact, have an anti-magnetic character, the military chaplaincy, like the Madonna, the child, and grenade, that pushes people away from God while giving a feeling that one is moving more deeply into the life of Christ God? What I'm not saying is that there should not be chaplains in the military. Jesus Christ came to save sinners, not to save the saved. Every group in the world that wants to have a Christian chaplain should have a Christian chaplain. For example, in parts of the United States, prostitution is legalized. Prostitution is even unionized. If the prostitutes union wants to have a Christian chaplain, they should be able to have a Christian chaplain. What kind of chaplain would it be that told the men and women who are prostitutes, don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat, don't get drunk, and write home to mother, but never mentioned the utter inconsistency between lust for sale, and the mind and the heart of Christ? It would be a kept chaplaincy. And what if the chaplaincy selectively picked those and was allowed to selectively pick those who were going to be its chaplains? That is, what if that group was the final decider of who was going to be its chaplains? They picked consistently pro-prostitution chaplains. What kind of chaplaincy would that be? So also with the military. What kind of chaplain is it? What kind of chaplaincy is it that tells the boys, don't get drunk, don't use drugs, don't swear, etc., etc.? It never says a word about the inconsistency between homicide and the mind and the heart of Jesus. What kind of chaplaincy is it? Where the chaplains are screened to see if they're pro-military before they're allowed to come in. It's all a diabolical sham. Made even more so because people do not perceive what they're involved in. Because people refuse to question deeply the consistency of their position. Just war theory, just revolution theory. Jesus with a machine gun with a dagger. Jesus with a hand grenade, with a flamethrower. Jesus pressing the button to incinerate hundreds of thousands of people with a missile. It's a fraudulent Jesus, whether he has on a government uniform or whether he has on a revolutionary uniform. The justification of violence through the use of the gospel is sham Christianity and deserves not another day of existence, not another day of church participation in what has been probably the most destructive, the most untrue, the most deceitful presentation of Christianity over the last 1700 years by those who should know better.